way into these plays, and once you've found your way in, you will never want to leave, believe me. It enriches one's life in every possible way.
I don't know why you have the mic in your hand, Richard. Has anyone seen the Bulldog Drummond films? Wonderful thrillers, like spy thrillers. Is it true that you were actually approached to be the first James Bond?
It is true, yes. I was under contract to Metro Goldwyn Mayer at the time. I had a very nice contract with them, one film a year for 6 years or something, and they were very nice to me, and it was a very nice thing to have in your back pocket, that you had to do one film a year for Metro Goldwyn Mayer. And the first director of the Bond films was Terence Young, who had seen me a lot in the theatre and liked my work a lot, and he said to the producers, if Richard Johnson doesn't play Bond, I'm not going to direct it. So they had to take it seriously that I was contender for the part. And they sent for me to come along and to meet them and to talk about this series of films that they were intending to make. Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman were the name of the producers, and they were characters who didn't command a great deal of respect at that time in the movie world. They made a lot of not very successful B movies, and so I was snobbily thinking about whether I would really want to work for them. And I went along, and they said, well, Mr. Johnson, we want you to play James Bond, and we would need you to be under contract exclusively to us for 7 years. And so I said, well, thank you very much, gentlemen, and good afternoon. Now, I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to play the same part for 7 years. I didn't want to be lumbered with being in these thrillers that, for all I know, might turn out to be just as bad as many of the thrillers they've made already. And I had a good excuse, because I said, well, I'm afraid that I wouldn't be able to get out of my MGM contract and be able to do this for you, so pass it off in that way. And they then found, they went through, not only I was not the only actor approached to play James Bond, there were others of my generation at that time who were approached. And Sean Connery was the kind of actor at that time that when you'd gone through the leading young actors of the time, you inevitably turned the job down. You offered it to Sean, and he would probably do it for you. And luckily for them, he was exactly the right guy to play the part, because he comes from Glasgow. He was a milkman at one time. He spoke with something of a Scottish accent. Bond was supposed to be this quintessential English gentleman who drank tea with his finger up like this and had his cocktails shaken and not stirred and all this kind of stuff. And Sean was completely unright for the part. And it was his unrightness for the part that made him right, you see what I mean? Because it was so off the wall that he was playing the part, that somehow in a way it kind of commanded your attention. And also they had one very, very fortunate thing with the first Bond, Dr. No, which they thought would be the kind of thriller that would have the audience gnawing their fingernails with apprehension about what would happen to the hero in the next episode, and the terrible things were going on with poor James Bond. And there was one scene in that where he had a black widow spider descend into his chest wig, and it was crawling around in the house. And they thought, when people see this scene, people will be they'll be under the seats with terror. The hero's going to be bitten by the black, look out. In point of fact, they were under the seats, but they were laughing. Laughing about it, you see. That's what changed the thriller at that point, I think, the way that audiences reacted to thrillers. It was funny as well as thrilling. It was funny, and that's what made the James Bond series. I've never been like that before.
And
so
speaking of James Bond, seated next to you is an individual who did stunts in James Bond films. Didn't you, Ottaviano?
Go on, tell us about some stuff.
Sorry. Allora, io ho fatto l'ultimo di James Bond con Daniel Craig. È stato un film veramente difficile per noi.
I did the last movie with Dave, the new James Bond. It was a really hard movie for us.
Non so se chi è che ha visto il film.
Who's seen the movie, the new James Bond that came out?
Se ricordano l'inseguimento che viene fatto tra l'Aston Martin e le 159 che abbiamo girato sul lago di Garda.
If you can remember the chase with the Aston Martin and 500, what, 109?
Le Alfa 159.
The Alfa Romeo around the lake.
Nere,
Chase.
black.
The black Alfa Romeos.
Quella sequenza nel film durerà 1 minuto, 2 minuti. Noi siamo stati 4 settimane a prepararlo perché andavamo veramente veloci, il rischio era altissimo. E difatti ci sono stati 5 o 6 incidenti gravissimi.
The scenes in the movie ended up being cut down to a minute and a half, but it took about 5 to 6 weeks to shoot it, and it was incredibly dangerous, and there were several really grave accidents.
Diciamo a livello economico, bene, grazie, abbiamo guadagnato molto. A livello lavorativo, io penso che non serva mettere a rischio la vita per fare le cose del cinema, perché il cinema è finzione e tale dovrebbe rimanere. Invece su James Bond, per un problema credo che sia stato tra il regista e lo stunt coordinator americano, c'è stata una disputa tra di loro e quindi chiedevano sempre il massimo. Con queste macchine andavamo delle stradine piccoline che passavano 2 macchine a malapena a 150 all'ora. Ecco perché sono stati fatti gli incidenti e abbiamo rischiato veramente tantissimo.
The movie was economically a great choice for him to work on. He was paid very well, but the amount of human risk was not worth. He said stunts should be done for the fun and the excitement, but not about losing people's lives. And then I forgot all that. Poi dopo ho lavorato con gli stunts.
Che per noi stunt è stato pericoloso, abbiamo lavorato a rischio.
Oh, it was incredibly dangerous for the stunts, and his organization of stunt people was coordinating, and risking life was absolutely not worth it in the name of movie making, because movie making should be fiction only.
Excellent. Well, this is one of the fastest hours we've ever had. We're going to wrap up with one more question from the last hand I saw here. We'll let you get back to your tables.
I'm going to go back to a couple of things. First of all, for Beatrice, I'm sorry about the feelings that you have about Love Ritual. That's the title I know it as. I think your performance in it is amazing. You have a wonderful character development throughout the film.
Thank you so much.
You play it with so much passion, and I know it sounds like the production company kind of really exploited you, and I'm sorry to hear that.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. I work really hard.
It's a fine piece of work and a beautiful film.
Very
so
sweet.
just
Thank you.
wanted to say that, mention that. And I wanted to go back to Ian's talk about the language in the films. You said it was 50B language, I think is the words that you used. And I've always wondered about Americans who are on sets and who are doing this work. Would you ever have the urge to suggest a different phraseology or a little bit of a different intonation? Because there's definitely, that quality about the dubbing in the films that we see. So I just wonder, or could you even have that kind of influence in those ways?
Well, I think in lots of films you think, well, I'll try that. You think you want to add something, and you can add something by suggesting a different phrasing or a different line. And what an actor's instinct usually works.
Right.
But there's a series which none of you have probably seen called Survivors, which is the reason why I started working in Italian films. But I wrote 3 of them. And as a writer, if anyone wanted to change my lines, I was absolutely horrified and got very, very cross. But I think that an actor's instinct, for whatever they want to say about the script, is probably more right than the writer's.
Well, we've kept them here over an hour. We've kept you in your seats over an hour, but we hate to keep them too long. Please give our panel a hand. I'd like to personally thank them all for being here this weekend. I'd like to thank you all for being here this weekend. And I invite you to go back